Welcome. Glad to have this opportunity to share with you all over the next several weeks. Glad you were able to take some time. Appreciate MCSA and MASSA asking me to lead this effort. We're entering a critical time, and I believe what's planned is very much needed. I'm Jim Cummins, retired superintendent. My last spot was Neosha. I retired a couple of years ago. Now I work with a couple of companies that I've founded, one with a partner, edX and Lifted, and we do everything from finance consulting to professional development. So just really appreciate this opportunity to spend the next several weeks with you and share some experiences that I've had, along with the things that I think are probably most critical as we kind of enter this time. For many of you, it's probably the first time in your careers leading that you're looking at a situation where you're probably going to have to cut some budgets over the next few years. And what MASSA really wants to do is provide a weekly session here through the end of the year to try to help with the current budget. So what do we need to do just getting FY27 set up? And then I believe the long-term plan is to continue this course, so to speak, into next year, maybe bi-weekly, and just start walking through, key finance topics and really building towards who do we include? How do we manage the politics? What are the critical pieces we need to look at as we really start to probably have some cuts next year in our budgets? So I want to make sure that I mention Massa will be recording these. I know that several of our friends will be attending MOASBO next week for their great training. And there will be other times when you can't log in, but Massa will be recording them, filing them, I imagine, in their library. So this way, even if you can't be here for the live session, you'll be able to go back and listen. So I want to make a few disclaimers. Any CPA always has to cover a little bit, so I'm gonna do that on the front end. I'll just do it once. I won't do it every week. But I'll let you know I do most of my work in Excel, and Excel is not easy to link to presentations. So what I've done a lot of times as we go through this, you'll see a link to a Google Sheet. And if you see the XLXS uh, extension up in the top, realize that that's a link to an Excel spreadsheet. The disclaimer is that Google Sheets does not have a lot of the functions that Excel has. So sometimes when it uploads into a Google Sheet, it loses its integrity, and so you can take that for what it's worth. I'll point out an issue on a cash flow slide that I share later. Also, any estimates, projections that are referenced in these sessions are for consideration and points of discussion. Every district has unique characteristics, and each leader, should really evaluate how that pertains through the lens of your own district. And then lastly, when I use information, I'll sometimes use something that I prepared for a client, but I will typically try to do my best to eliminate the name of the district. You will see examples in here that do have names of districts on them, and just those are items that are publicly available. Typically, I get most of that information off the ASBRs. So, kind of enough ground setting. Let's kind of dig in. So really the agenda for today is to talk a little bit about why we're here. We're going to really kind of hit the revenue side today, talk a little bit at the end about fund balance and reserves, and then a little bit of strategic framing as we go forward. Some of the key concepts that I hope you can take away from this first session is that revenue is the key. Unlike business, we can't do more advertising. We can't raise our prices. We have little to impact the revenue side of the school business. So it's critical that we know the size of the pie that we're going to start giving away slices. So when we talk about budgeting, we usually think about how are we going to spend that money, but what we're really focused on is the revenue side. How much are we going to be able to spend? And one critical element I think that sometimes get lost is we're really looking at what is the change in revenue. So we know kind of what the status quo is, but what is the change going to be? And so as many of you are working on your current budget or your budget for next year, I would encourage you at the same time you're looking at those numbers to also be analyzing what the amended current year budget would be. So in other words, if you had $10 budgeted for revenues this year and you're going to get 11, that's a 10% difference that you need to understand as you start figuring out what next year's is. So is next year's going to be 11 again? Is it going to be 12? Is it going to be 10? So having some understanding of that. Um, the big rocks, we're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about understanding where your big money comes from because you want to spend your energy making sure you're good on those projections, and less energy on whether fines are going to be $1,000 or $1,100. Uh, if it's off, investigate. I'll give you a quick example. When I was assistant superintendent at a district over a decade ago, we had a big increase in locally assessed utilities. And I thought well, that's awesome. And so the next year I built that same large number in for those locally assessed utilities. Well, when the final came in, it was back to normal. And what I learned after some investigating at the clerk or at the courthouse was that when they're working on something, it's locally assessed. Once it's finished, it becomes state assessed. And so if something is largely different, something looks unusual, take some time to investigate it before you just assume that it's going to continue. And then budgeting shouldn't be lonely. Today we're going to talk about revenue budgeting, and there's a smaller group of people I would think that you would want to have in your circle during the revenue budgeting. But when we get to the expenditure side, you really want to know that others are involved. And so don't feel like you're on an island when it comes to budgeting. So I'm going to spend the next three slides on why, just to help you understand that this isn't a ploy to get school leaders to watch massive webinars. There is a serious issue on the horizon that MASA wants you to be aware of. They want you to be coached up on, and try to give you the tools that you need to navigate a time that probably most of you have not been through. So just reading the tea leaves, we know there's a shortfall presently. They're plugging the budget just to survive right now. So if we know that they're doing that with some reserves, um, reserves aren't sustaining. They're kind of a one-time fix. If you watch the legislative priorities, you know that there are things that are coming after us, coming after our funding. The relief funds that many of you have relied on in your positions, and I did in my position, those are going away. So that ability to kind of lean on those. And one of the things I'll just add here is you might want to do some historical checking to see how your district spent those relief funds, because if they were on positions or things that are currently continuing, that gives you some history to be able to go back and say, listen, this was purchased because of COVID funds, and those funds are going away Therefore, we need to really evaluate those. Prudence is always um, valuable, and so that's a part of the why. The cyclical nature of state finance is something that those of us that have been around for a while have seen. And so it is just part of the pattern. It won't be forever, but I could suggest that it'll be here for a while. And then I think part of the why is learning is valuable regardless of the financial future. So if you're a lifelong learner, hopefully this will add to your tool belt. So this was just a clip from the Missouri Independent and just another source that indicates that um, we're filling holes right now and the forecast is not favorable. So these are some more whys. Property tax credits, property tax restructuring, looking at going to different rates for your different types of property. St. Louis already deals with that. A Hancock on debt service, that's problematic. All of the preventative maintenance type bond issues that we run with no tax increase to try to keep up with things, um, that would be in serious jeopardy if they attached Hancock to debt service. There's discussions about minimum levy reduction. When I looked, there about 56 districts had a 275 levy. I don't know what they are raising up to, from what number they're starting to get to 275, but my suspicion is most of those are probably below 275. So if they lower the minimum levy to 220, they're going to be probably somewhere between 220 and what their current um, calculation is. So that could be problematic. They're wanting to put caps on assessed valuation, thinking about changing to state income tax. There's just a lot going on that makes it prudent that we do this work. And historically, we could count on local taxes, but that's becoming even under attack. So I'm going to jump into revenue. We're going to talk about understanding how big your pie is. That's something I've been doing a training at Moasbo for. I've done it, I don't know, probably the past decade off and on, but talking about determining how big your pie is, how to go about budgeting. And we always start with determining where are the critical pieces. So I pulled these just random school districts off of the ASBR to get an understanding of where those critical pieces are. So I want to point out a few things of highlight. Um, First of all, between 58% and 75% of each of these districts, the revenue is generated from three sources. And I say three sources because when I talk about the guaranteed payment and classroom trust fund, most of the time you'll hear me reference those as one because it's important to understand that the guaranteed payment is the calculation. The classroom trust fund is just a carve out from that. And if you're a district that puts all of your classroom trust fund into Fund One or Fund Two, it really is just one number. If you are a district that uses classroom trust fund to support Fund Four, or in some circumstances, maybe Fund Three, then it matters a little bit what the classroom trust fund carve out is. I hope that makes sense, but the guaranteed payment is the critical piece. So when I talk about there's basically the three big rocks that you need to know. The second part that's important is to understand that between 73 and 97% of these districts' funds come from state and local sources. So when I'm spending my energy on understanding what elements make up those pieces of the funding. In the purple cell there, you can see Van Buren has 23.65% of their revenue, and this is FY25 from the ASBR. And again, this is operations only, Fund 1, Fund 2. 23% of their revenue came from federal sources. Now that's significant because that's an outlier to what most districts have. I backed out. They had received a little bit of ESSER reimbursement. I backed that out, and it's still 23%. So they have some federal money that they're getting. And my point to everybody else is if you have a number like that, you just want to make sure that that is a continuing number, or if it's something that was a 1 or 2 year program that they got involved in, a grant, something that was coming from the federal government. And if it is, and it's going away, make sure that you're aware of that, especially if you're coming into a new district. You want to make sure that those numbers or those amounts are continuing. I have the levy highlighted in yellow for these different districts. Um, don't know if Clark County is set it at 275 or they moved it up. It calculated less than that and they moved it up, but they could be potentially one that was impacted by the lowering of the minimum levy. Then the other thing that's important is just as you think about the new formula being written, they're talking about changing the performance measure to 358. So in other words, when they calculate your local effort deduct, they would take your assessed valuation times 358. So in all of these districts except for Hale, they would be taking a larger local effort deduct than what they are actually collecting in local taxes. So I put that on there just to kind of show that related to the potential impact of the new formula. Reserve percentages, those are all what I would consider strong, reasonable reserves. But I think it's important to note that if you're going into this budget spend down with a thought of, well, we can dip into our reserves, it's important to understand that even at 3% a year, if they had to spend down for 10 years, all of these districts would get into a tight situation. And for Lebanon, even at 2% a year spend down, strategic would put them in a tight spot. So just understand that as we talk about reserves, reserves are there for tight times, but we'll talk about at the end, you really have to have a plan for it. So here are some things I think as we jump into estimating revenues and the things that I think are important to have. I believe these are must-have data pieces. You're going to need the projection tool. You're going to need your finance memos. You're going to want to keep current on those. Um, I believe you need to create your own document, and I'll show you an example of your historical AV, tax rate, collection info, so you kind of know what's going on in your district, your county, or counties, to understand that. A master planning document to see what your history has been and maybe to project out a little bit so that you can see where you would be based upon some assumptions you make. I think you need to know your ePEGS login. That might be a nice to have. I always thought it was a must have because I like to go in and look at SPED and federal programs and different funding sources. And then I really encourage you to understand your accounting system reports and how they can help you analyze data in a much quicker manner. And we'll talk a little bit about that. I think some nice to have data is the ASBR history. I'll show you that. I think making it your own is important. I'll show you what I did when I came to Neosho because I needed the history. I wanted I wanted the data. But really, you can pull off of that ASBR the things that you feel most comfortable that you're going to need. I think it's nice to have some cash flow data to inform your decisions. And then, if they're available, next year's allocations. Federal programs allocations are available. I'll show you where to get those. I don't believe IDEA is available yet. So, number one, let's start with how do I get my information? So the DESI projection tool, these slides will walk you directly to it. Go to DESI's webpage. There's a section, click on finance. It will take you to this page. Again, you'll click on school finance over here on the right. And there's a section for calculation tools. You will want to get the basic formula calculation tool for all districts. And when you get there, it's important to note that they change this periodically. So the current one that's available is 4326. And sometimes the changes won't impact your district. So if you're working on the one prior to that, it may not have any impact, this new sheet. And I'll show you on the sheet kind of where they talk about what changes with each iteration. But I do think it's important to keep current, check back here periodically as you're working through your tool, just to make sure that they don't have an update that you need to check on. So when you download it, and this is not intended for you to be able to read, this is intended to show you that when you get it, this is what these are all the lines that are included in the projection tool. The important thing is when you select your district, so when you go into district name up at the top and you put in your district, it will black out the lines that aren't pertinent to you. And I think that's important to note, because it says, okay, based upon your district, the things that we need to calculate your um, payment, these are the lines you need to fill out. What I think is an important note at this point is when you're projecting for 26, 27, you're going to need your summer school projections for this year because they will use this upcoming summer school, a couple of months, they will use that for your calculation. The other thing, the yellow highlight there is a caution. Be cautious when you're completing this, to make sure that the PK that you're putting on this projection model is PK that the state is going to pay you for. If you have MOQPK, if you have other sources of PK funding, be careful that you are only putting state aid PK in this tool. And then the red highlight there over some black cells is a lesson I learned. I was doing some projection work for a client, and I kept getting a really squirrely number in FY 28 or 29. I couldn't figure it out. If the number was supposed to be 600,000, it was like 6 million. I'm like, what is going on? And I kept going back and I kept looking at this screen. Well, evidently, I had accidentally put a number in the black region. And so understand that even though it's black, if you put a number in there, it's taking it. So if something doesn't look right, you can go back, you can highlight those cells and look up to see if there's anything in it, even though you can't see it. So hopefully that helps to avoid a situation that I kind of learned the hard way. All right, at the bottom of that sheet is where you need to fill in your estimations. So whatever it is that you're going to use. And here's where I go back to that caveat of these are some numbers off of the Massa Finance memo, and I'll show you where those come from here in a second. But presently in 26, 27, I've got in here 6,700. Got an email from a superintendent a couple of days ago. They're planning to use 6,600. Fair enough. The classroom trust fund, again, understand if that goes to 495 instead of 567, it's not going to change your state aid calculation. It's going to change how much is carved out as classroom trust fund, which you can be moved to different funds. And then Prop C estimate is in there as well. If you're a small school grant recipient, you're going to need to put those estimations in as well so that it can divvy up the 20 and $10 million portions. All right. Did it, Mark, can you tell me, did it switch to the finance memo screen?
Yes, it did.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So this is the link to the finance memo. They just posted April because this actually wasn't posted when I was checking this morning. But you can go in here. And one of the things I like about the finance memo this month, so let me back up. I got a little ahead of myself. The basic formula, it's saying, they calculated the current SAT on 6,900. They're currently using 505 for the CTF, Prop C. So they've got some current information here, talk about the thresholds. But what I love about it is they put this commentary in this month's memo about here's what's causing some issues, some things of concern that you need to be thinking about. It still has the budget estimate for the current year at 6,900. I won't read these numbers to you. Transportation at 95%. But here's where it starts getting, these are the governor's recommendations as you follow the House Bill 2 through, you'll get an idea ultimately about where that funding is, and I'm sure Massa will update this. This is, if you don't look at the finance memo every week or every month, I would encourage you to do so. I try to put out a little podcast recapping it as much as I can and include it in my resources tab. But important to understand that that's a great source of info. All right, another important spot for information that I've got on here is the accounting manual. And I say that because as you start to calculate these numbers, it's also important that you understand what you're calculating. So when you go to the accounting manual, you can I've been at this for 30 years and I still keep the most current accounting manual on my desktop, and I refer to it probably at least weekly, just about a coding issue or you know a number that a project code I'm looking for. But if you go to revenue object codes, it'll give you a quick reference here. It just, if you want to look something up, what does um, where should I put my AP, IB exam fee reimbursement? It'll tell you which object code to put that in. What I would suggest is more looking at the detailed descriptions, and it'll tell you here's your 5111 is your local taxes, tells you about it, but it tells you it has to place each fund in the same proportion as the levy. So whatever you levied, that's how you divvy up those funds as they come in. And then this location code requirement is more related to expenses over here. So if it's an expense that you got multiple elementaries and you have to split it, it'll say yes over here. All right. So important to understand classroom or yeah, the Prop C money, it's oddly written 75% of one half. So three-eighths of the funds must go into the teacher fund and the rest can go into incidental. Doesn't mean all of it can't go into teacher fund, but three-eighths has to. Same, you'll notice the color changes when it goes to state. It turns red. Just another quick item in case you don't know. When you're looking at object codes, when you get your transmittal from the state and it says you got those funds, it will say over on the left what the object code is. And if the object code has the second digit is a one, it's local. If the second digit is a three, it's state. So a 53 project code is a state. Mostly what you'll get from DESE is either going to be a 53 or a 54 code. For basic formula, no less than 75% has to go into the teacher fund. And then down here, you get into a little bit of the placement, the CTF that I was talking about. Can put that in any fund with the exception that any amount in excess of your 2010 distribution has to go into Fund 2. All right, so some tracking tools that you probably need to be aware of. I talked about ASBR history. So this is an example of one that I did, like I said, all of this information is available on the ASBR. So you can go back to 2001 in most situations and pull any information you want. I pulled it by revenue function or object codes and then by function codes. Create a summary, local revenues, county revenues, what did we spend in instructional expenses, how much was certified wages. I could track my reserve percentages so you can see the history of your district. All of that is valuable information. It takes a little bit of time, but I think you'd be surprised. Maybe 2 or 3 hours of your time in an evening creates a database of some great information for you. Local collection history. I would encourage you to create a document similar to this that talks about what is my AV? What has the growth been year over year? What was the levy and what did I collect? So I can determine what is my collection percentage historically. And that's going to be, you may go from a county that has uh, a low collection fee to a county that has a higher collection fee. And depending on the magnitude of your taxes, a percentage could be a significant difference. So try to create something like this. I have also the data gives me what is my average reassessment increase and what has been my average non-reassessment increase so that you can use that data. I would encourage you to create some type of master planning document. And the reason for this is because it takes if your accounting system has 300 revenue codes in it, this breaks it down to, I don't know, 12, a handful of the big rocks. And so you can see the top portion of this is revenue, and I can quickly see what my revenue has changed over time. I can project out. You'll notice on this particular one, this is work I was doing in FY24. So it was only projection out to 26, 27, which shocking how quickly we got here. But you can create this, encourage you to push it out at least 2 or 3 years when you're building it. Very supportive document for your work. This ledger, if you have the ability or somebody on your staff has the ability to pull your ledger down into an Excel format, I would encourage you to do that. I was working on my adjusted FY24 budget, my FY25 budget when I was using this particular sheet. But what you can do when you can get this information downloaded is you can look at last year, year to date, versus what was it at the end. So if I spent 80% or if I'd received 80% of this revenue by this time last year, and I've only received 70% of what I budgeted this year, I might need to do a little digging. If I've received 85% already, then maybe I undershot that revenue line item and I'm going to come out a little better than expected. So really being able to get this and digest it, um, I would encourage you or somebody on your staff to be able to download this and be able to manipulate it. Lastly, we're going to look at a couple of cash flow items here. Creating a document that tracks your operating cash from month to month, your monthly revenues, your monthly expenses. Not only does it allow you to do a cash flow graph, schools are very cyclical. So if your cash is flowing like it has in recent years, that gives you a comfort level. But the other part of it is if you build it or can find one, you can actually take your historical information and do some projecting of what your year end is going to look like. And the longer the year goes, the more accurate your estimate becomes as to how your year will end. So I encourage you to consider that. And then you can do the same thing for wages. Wages, when we get to the expense side, you're going to find that wages and benefits make up 60 to 80% of district expenses, in some cases more. And so managing your cash flow of wages is really important. And so here's one of the examples of why this doesn't work in Google Sheets. This actually calculates from the total what it projects out to be, and you can kind of track. But it does allow you again to track your wages and make sure that you're kind of on target. Picking up speed here. All right, EPEGs. Um, Understand how this is on the DESE webpage. You log into your DESE application at the bottom of DESE's main page, sign into your account. This will come up. If you don't see EPEGs over here, that means whoever's running your system needs to give you access to EPEGs so that you can see it. The secure access side is for your own district. The public access is for other districts. And I would just encourage you, if you're wanting to build out peer models, if you're wanting to see how a local district kind of relates and how their spending is, their revenues, you can go into the public access and get their ASBR information. Good source of comparative data. When you go into EPEGs, you're going to go to funding application menu and it'll pop up these five sections: career, college and career, educator quality, etc. The quality schools and special education are probably the ones you're going to spend the most time on related to what we're talking about. When you go to quality schools, you'll be able to find your ESEA consolidated. And I know these are small, so but it'll pop up your budget. If you're looking for your FY27 allocations, there's a link here, and I believe Kelly said he would share this. But there's a link here that will take you to DESE's webpage with all of the different allocations. So any of them that are in blue, the allocations are ready, um, and you can pull that information there for budgeting purposes. And I will just a quick tip on budgeting for federal programs. I always just found my allocation. I put the allocation in, and then I made sure that whatever was on the expense side was the same. So in other words, if I had three teachers and some supplies that I typically put into Title One, and I was going to get a $400,000 Title One allocation, I would make sure that those four budget items in the expenditure side also equaled 400,000. Where that might be different is if you plan to spend some carryover funds or do something different. But typically, revenue wise, federal programs should be a neutral item. The revenue side and the expenditure side should match. Okay, got just a couple minutes. I'm going to shift gears here to talk a little bit about reserves. Your fund balance and reserve percentage is important. We talked about that a little bit at the beginning, but I want to just make sure you understand how that calculation is being made. So when you go to your ASBR, this is somebody's FY25 ASBR information. To calculate your ending fund balance or your reserve percentage, which a lot of people will talk about, you take your ending fund balance in funds one and two, so the green circle, you subtract anything that is restricted. That might be student activities, that might be unspent professional development that you're still on the hook for. It could be a number of things. The ASBR will tell you what it is. You subtract that from your ending balance, and then you divide by the total of Fund 1 and Fund 2 expenditures. And that gives you your reserve percentage. So in other words, how much balance at June 30 did I have percentage wise to what I spent for the year? In essence, I had 35% of what I spent in reserves. Some quick things to think about as we talk about that. What is healthy versus risky? And that can be a little bit district specific. Important things to think about. What is the district of the philosophy, or of the superintendent of the school board? What is their philosophy, their belief? Is there a comfort at 20 or is the comfort at 35? Is there a board policy that dictates what your targeted reserve, reserve percentage should be, or the balance in dollars? Are you a district that requires larger cash flow timing in October through December? If you're a heavily locally funded district, then you're going to need some money in October, November, December to handle um, cash flow for payroll because it can get tight. Do you have some future needs? Are you building your reserves because you have a need that you're trying to build towards, a one-time expenditure? And I just highlight this. If you're going to spend down reserves, you need a plan. Your board needs to be on in step with you. What are we doing as we spend this down so that they don't come back and say, well, you didn't tell us we were going to end up in this position. Some other considerations, is it a one-time spend or is it an ongoing expense? If it's an ongoing expense, be very careful if it is dipping into reserves. Where do I want to be in 5 to 10 years? If I'm going to start spending down, have a plan for where the stopping point is. Can I recover if my projections fail? I plan to spend down 3% this year, but I missed and I spent down 6%. Is that catastrophic or is that something I can recover from? And I would make sure there's documented board support for whatever the plan is to spend down those reserves. So I'm going to end with this slide. What is the application? I think knowledge provides confidence, and confidence leads to trust. If you're confident in your numbers, you understand that, I think you build trust, and that trust creates an environment where we're kind of in this together. And it may not be as important on the revenue side, but it's really going to be important when you start talking the expenditure side, because you're going to start bringing in teacher groups, patrons, parents, uh, directors, and if they understand that you're knowledgeable and you're confident in what your revenue numbers are, they're gonna jump in the boat with you and help you. As far as partners, when I talked about budgeting shouldn't be lonely, I think you definitely need to include your board. They need to be part of the how aggressive, how conservative to be. They need to be part of the where do we want our reserves to be. Bring your peers in. Peers build confidence. If you're kind of consensus on estimates, they provide a different perspective, and oftentimes they may have experience that you don't. And then lastly, lean on your state organizations, Massimo, ASBO. They have resources, they have support, and they want to be there for you. Kelly, I'm gonna turn it back over to you. I missed by 2 minutes.